My post is dedicated to Nadezhda Zharintzova, a Russian born cultural mediator who contributed to building bridges between Britain and Russia. Originally, 3 years ago, almost 3 years ago, I was planning to write my PhD thesis about her work as a writer and translator, work that embodied a great variety of cultural trends both in Russia and in Britain at the turn of the 20th century. I was going to follow the microhistorical approach, so effectively applied to translation studies by Jerome K, and explore Zharintzova's life as, to quote Benjamin Harshev, as an open semantic field through which various tendencies crisscross. Some of them are involuntarily and some embraced by an individual. And getting ready to start my PhD as a part of the Rustrans project at the University of Exeter, I collected a substantial number of archival materials about Zharintzova, both in Russian and in English. However, throughout my work, which fell during the pandemic, I moved far away from my original plan. And as perhaps often happens with PhD dissertations, in the current stage of my project, I have left Zharintzova behind, and regretfully she is not in my thesis any longer. I'm still exploring the process of mediating Russian culture in Britain between the mid-19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. However, my focus has changed, and instead of exploring the history of one cultural mediator, I analyze how the spiritual aspect of Russian culture was variously promoted by different groups of translators, critics, commentators, and Russian Orthodox religious experts to British audiences. In my thesis, I'm challenging Pascal Casanova's The World Republic of Letters to demonstrate that by representing Russian culture as a predominantly spiritual phenomenon, British mediators lifted Russia to the rank of the spiritual center of this numinous republic. And I must admit that at first, stepping aside from my original interest in this translator, in Zharintzova, was not an easy decision, because I felt attracted to the story of this somewhat romantic lady who ran away from her family house with a man twice older than her to start a new life in a new country. And it wasn't a story with a happy ending, unfortunately, as Zharintzova tells us in her autobiographical stories, which are, by the way, a great example of female Russian prose of that time. So just to say a few words about this story, from 1903 and during the following 7 years, Zharintzova's husband, who was the first governor of Port Arthur and served the Russian embassy in Belgravia, was suffering from paralysis, and Zharintzova had to take care of him and of her son and to earn a living in a foreign country. But despite many difficulties and struggles, she managed not to lose her cheerful approach to life, and the help that she received from her British and Russian friends only stimulated her to serve as a bridge between the two countries, as a translator, foreign correspondent, writer, artist, musician, and educational theorist. Zharintzova lived during a time when the number of Russian people in the UK was not numerous, and likewise in Russia, British travelers were quite rare. And the desire of both nations to learn more about each other was rapidly increasing due to several political and economic reasons. And Zharintzova took upon herself the task to accommodate both British and Russian interests. So on my poster, you can see a great variety of undertakings, of her undertakings. And I believe it is fascinating to see how she was simultaneously engaged with Lev Tolstoy, Jerome K, H.G. Wells, the classicist and anthropologist Jane Ellen Harrison, and a number of other people. And so, although today Zharintzova's books and articles about Russia and Britain, as well as her translations in both languages, are largely forgotten, at the turn of the century they were fairly successful in both countries. She greatly relied on her linguistic capital as a Russian, while writing for a British audience, and on her experience of living in Britain while writing for Russians. And people regarded her work as reliable and trustworthy. What united all her publications was her desire to educate. This was most evident in her several books for children and their parents, based on her experience of being involved in the life of mixed gender and non-denominational B-Dales school. In all her works, she sought to explain the world around her as she saw it and believed it to be. This throws light on her experimental approach to translations of Russian poetry into English. Her main work is titled Russian Poets and Poems. Zharintzova developed her unique system of transliteration and translation theory to preserve the original lilt of Russian poems, to foreignize it rather than to domesticate it. In the introduction to her work, she did not only question the approaches of more famous and successful male translators, but also fought common British stereotypes about Russian literature as grim and depressing. She wished to highlight a more cheerful side of Russian culture for a very specific kind of poetry which she chose to translate, quote, the poetry where the Russian muse smiles. So it was really important for her to emphasize a positive side of her native culture. And this poster is made mainly to commemorate the memory of this amazing translator and probably my personal memory of researching her life and admiring her bravery when I, as an international student, was getting ready to move from Russia to Britain to start my PhD project. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you very much. Do you have any questions for Anna?
Hello, Anna. My question is whether you think that Constance Garnett stole Nadezhda's thunder. Did she eclipse Nadezhda? Could Nadezhda have been the Constance Garnett that Constance Garnett was?
Thank you for your question. I'm not sure she could because, well, Constance Garnett was amazing because she was so prolific. She spent most of her time translating works, and that's why she managed, I suppose, to translate so much. Whereas my translator, I appropriated her. Well, she had so many other things to do, and she used translation and working as a foreign correspondent for different periodicals to earn a living. So I'm not sure if she would be able to dedicate that much time to translations. And I also think she was more interested in poetry rather than prose because she was a musician herself, and somehow folk songs, poems, I think attracted her a bit more than prose, although she tried to translate prose as well. But Constance Garnett is famous for her prose translations mainly, and Nadezhda Zharintzova, I think, preferred poetry to prose. And she was also a native speaker of Russian. Her English was good, but I think it wasn't perfect. So she needed an editor, so she always needed some additional support to publish her works in English. And she also translated so much into Russian, so she translated both sides, which is quite interesting to explore as well. I think that's it.